Welcome to Surfacing. In this episode, hosts Lisa Welchman and Andy Vitale speak to podcaster and journalist Natali Morris. This episode saw a discussion of what it means to be an online personality, parenting in the digital age, and how the internet and web have shifted the dynamics of traditional media.
Hey, Natali, welcome. Thanks for coming on the show. I'd love for you to just take a couple of seconds and tell everybody about yourself.
Okay. I guess one of the reasons you might think of me when you think of this topic is because I was one of the OG podcasters. I started video podcasting way early, back in the early aughts. And so I did some video or some audio podcasting, but mostly video when it was so nascent. It was kind of like we thought that it was a mixture of blogging and vlogging and news. And so I was pulled from a podcast called Cranky Geeks with John Dvorak, which was also one of the original video podcasts. And I was a guest on that one time, and Adam Curry came along and he said, I saw you on that show. I think you should do your own show, which still blows my mind that happened, because I wasn't very good on it. I was a technology reporter before that for PC Magazine and the San Francisco Examiner, but I decided to give it a try. I was young and dumb enough to do it. And oh gosh, if you ask me what year it is, I can't really remember. I want to say 2002, 2003. And so I cut my teeth on broadcasting on the internet where it just didn't seem to matter much. Back in the day, it was like, TV news was where it's really at. And then the rest of us will like fiddle around on the internet and see what's what. And so I did a show on a network called Pod Show, which was owned by Adam Curry, and he had a business partner at the time named Ron Bloom. So anyway, I did this show called Textra, and then I was moved over to CNET. I was recruited to move to New York and do a similar news show about technology, daily show on CNET TV. And then CNET was acquired by CBS. And then I became the technology reporter for CBS News for a while. And so that is how I cut my teeth, as being someone who was new to the technology, but now news is news. On the internet and on TV, it's really the same. We didn't see it going that direction at the time. I think we thought it would be one or the other, but it's interesting now how they merge. Since being a technology reporter on broadcast TV, I've since left network news, and I live in Europe now with my family. My husband was also a news anchor. And so what we do together now is we take our love for news and our ability to broadcast, and we just sort of took it on the road, and we do it ourselves. So we have a daily YouTube show called Morning Invest that my husband anchors. Sometimes I'll fill in, sometimes not, mostly because I don't like to get camera ready and he takes much longer. Yeah. So most of my news chops now goes into the newsletter. So there's a Morning Invest newsletter, and then there's a Morning Invest YouTube show. And we've been able to build our own audience around this sort of love for talking about the news. But really our bent is about financial empowerment, delivering news that helps people sort of break through politics and partisan media and all of that stuff. We want people to be entertained and informed, but also empowered. I guess if I were to rank those things in our intentions, I would put empowered first, and then informed, and then entertained. Yeah, that's sort of our motto. And so we still do news, but we do it for ourselves.
So one of the interesting things about you is that you usually on this show, we're talking to people who are fingers on keys, domain experts in the digital space. Like they literally write code, design things, UX, and that's not you, but sort of like me, but even more in a more detached way, because at least my antecedents are from that, right? Like I started out in that way, and now I'm a management consultant helping people in that space. Yeah. But you've always been like an informed lurker, right? For digital spaces. And now you're hands in because you're also early adopter from the video stuff. I heard what you were saying, but just in this very weird demographic that Andy and I talk to are just like UX designers, coders. Like we haven't talked to a you before. I guess that's what we're saying. So you
Content
have a very
creator / lurker.
Yeah. So you have a very, very interesting perspective historically on the arc, not only of the work that you've done, watching news transform, right? And being a transformer in that space yourself, right? But just in general. And I'm just wondering, when you think about the time from 2000 to now and what's happened in terms of just the arc of activities. Andy and I started this podcast because we were talking a lot about digital safety, some of the accidents and mistakes that have happened with some of the big .coms and just in general. What are your thoughts about that? Where are you? How do you think we're doing in the digital world? It's a very, very broad question, but what are some of like your internal rants or happiness statements that you might have about what's happening online right now?
Yeah, I think when I started with putting my face on camera as a news person, I felt like I had a voice because someone else decided I had a voice. In this instance, it was network executives who decided this person's worthy of stepping in front of a camera. And I watch like my kids' TikTok generation, and they say what they have to say, and no one gives them permission to have a voice. And I kind of love that. In a way, it makes me feel, well, I find that it's beautiful and it's also humbling because I had to wait for someone to give me permission to be worthy, and they don't, right? I decided that, let's say, New Kids on the Block were awesome because the network executives told me so. The Spice Girls were a conglomerate's decision. Like those girls didn't even know each other, right? And so what I loved and what was said to me was all decided by executives, mostly white males. And that is not the case anymore. And so I find these people who just decide to use their voice, and it's beautiful. My kids were telling me about, they love Mr. Beast. They love, I don't know, they'll come up with some YouTuber, that they love. And I'm like, I love that you guys decided who's famous instead of, the networks deciding who's famous. I remember once having a pitch meeting with a producer at CBS. And I said, I think we should do a piece on Fred Figglehorn. Do you remember who that was? Fred Figglehorn. It was a teenage kid who he sped up all of his audio when he did. I don't think it was TikTok. It was, I know it wasn't TikTok. It was, what was the Twitter microblogging? It was that one. I can't remember now. And he was like,
it was Vine.
Vine. Thank you. Yes. He was a Vine star.
I just Googled him and I see his face. I know his face.
I was like, hey, everybody, Fred Figglehorn. Right. Yeah. And that's what made him so popular. And like tweeny girls loved him. And we tried to get him on the show, and we were the number 3 morning show at the time. We didn't have a lot of clout. It was like, if the Today Show calls, yes. Early show, I don't know. And so for some reason we didn't do the piece. And I remembered that the network's executives were like, who is this? And the producer was like, let me call my teenage daughters. And he boop, boop, boop on speaker. And he's like, hey girls, do you know who Fred Figglehorn is? And they're like, oh my gosh, daddy, blah, 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 blah. Like, and it was like, I was trying to bring this person who had, established their own credo beyond the networks to the networks. And they're like, we don't get it. We make stars. They don't make themselves. How can that be? And it's just totally democratized itself. And I think that that's beautiful. And also, like I said, humbling, because I have struggled to have a voice that no one gave me permission to have, right? Because a network had to say, yes, she can do this piece. Yes, she can have this job. Yes, she can be on our air. And so I was always waiting for permission. And so maybe my generation, now I'm 42, struggles with knowing how to just speak without permission, or at least maybe that's my personal struggle. And my kids' generation will not. So you can see that's like, I love it and I'm intimidated by it.
Yeah, that really, really resonates with me. I mean, I'm older than you even. I'm in my 50s. And so that the way that you frame that really is resonating with me. Obviously, this podcast, I'm always talking to Andy about like, I need to talk less and you need to talk more. I'm full of opinions and insights. But when I speak with particularly women younger than me and Black women in tech younger than me, they often criticize me for not being more sort of forthright and out there. And I'm like, well, that's not a space that I was allowed to occupy when I started giving keynotes at technology conferences. I was often the only Black person in the room at these events. And so it was really quite unusual for that to happen. So that really sounds like an important thing. I think that's a really good way to describe the generational divide that's happening. And also the fact that, some people aren't interested in being that out there as well. And so, but yeah. I think this permission slip component is really amazing. And you've really described a lot of the positive side of that. What about the other side, which is the reality that anybody in the world can put whatever they want, right, online for deceptive reasons? You talked about tweens, right? And so tweens that's a very, very vulnerable age for boys and for girls. But, my bias is towards girls, like lots of crazy stuff happening to your body and a lot of pressure on emerging women to be a certain way, look a certain way, do certain things. Yeah. I think that's when maybe some of the bullying can start online as well in that environment. What do you see going on the other side of that coin?
My view on that is that my children can have their devices around certain time frames and things like that. But I have always told them everything online is something that I can see. I may open up your apps. I may read through them. I'm not going to make a habit of it, but you have to know that I will see it. And I would rather them practice it early rather than just get online and then not understand the intention. And, my daughter, she likes to do these synced up TikToks where they're like dancing to a song, and she does the same stinking song over and over again. And my mom,
she's getting good though. Right? I'm sure she's getting good.
My mom and sister are like, oh, she likes this attention. And I was like, would you say that about a boy? And I was interested about that reaction because I don't think she's attention getting. I know her well and she's shy. I think she's expressing herself. And I don't like it that they have assigned this intention to her without asking her, without knowing, or because they think that she is a beautiful little girl and that like it is attention worthy. And so therefore they think that it is attention seeking. And I said, well, why, how else is she going to express herself then? Like she wants to dance to this thing, right? And I don't have a problem with it. And I talk to her about her intentions. And she does these. And like the other day, she had a towel, her bath towel on the floor behind her, and she hadn't combed out her hair. So it looked really stringy. And I was like, I'm not going to say anything about the hair because I don't want her to think that she should look a certain way. Right.
Yeah.
But then I'm like, comb your hair because I'm her mom. Right. So I said nothing about that, but I was like, hey, do you think maybe you should clean up your room before you do those things? Like, I don't want her to think everything has to be perfect, but I do want her to like, pick up the towel for mold reasons, Yeah.
So. What you're describing is what I often think critically of as life as performance. And so I was a philosophy major. And so one of the things that's really interesting about this generation, and it's not even a negative, it literally is just sort of observing an observation of what's really different is for good and for not good reasons of just the sense that you're not alive or you're not a person unless you're seen by other people online. Right.
Yeah.
And so that, I don't know how that's going to end up. Like coming out of my mouth in that way, that sounds not positive.
Well,
right. But I don't know that that's the case, right? Like, because there are things that I'm sure my generation did that looked really odd to my parents, and back on down the line, everything evolves over time. So I'm really just watching that and going like, this is really interesting, right? This is just a really interesting pattern. And it's hard to parent through dynamics that you didn't have when you were growing up, right? I think that's what's really difficult about having kids right now, which is, even my son who's 26, right? When he got to middle school, social media was just hitting, and the idea that a child would have a mobile phone was just hitting. Mm-hmm. And it was like, what? Like, you just didn't even know how to make a choice because it wasn't in your world pattern. So I wish you well with all that. It sounds like you're thoughtful about it.
I want her and my son. I have 2 daughters. The littlest is too small for that, but I want them to understand that they cannot value themselves based on what their feedback is. Mm-hmm. And that's something that takes practice, and I have to model it. So, in the early days of me being on the internet, I let them dress me up really cute and wore lower cut tops than I wear now. And I was 20 something, and now I'm 42. And so it used to be that, like, if you Googled my maiden name was Natali Del Conte, one of the first search results, how Google gives you suggested search terms. It was like Natali Del Conte boobs, right? So I was one of those girls, not because I put them out there, but because I had them. And that was,
they show up
I
sometimes.
don't think that I flaunted them, but I wore them. And
it's part of your body.
This was my pre-nursing life, and they were nice and they were worth Googling. And now people don't Google Natali Morris boobs, as far as I know, right? It's not one of the main search results. And I have to learn that I am validated in a different way. I have different values. I cannot value myself based on a public opinion. And I have to do that gracefully. And I have to teach my children that you are not what the feedback is online, but there is positives and negatives to it. I have a friend whose niece has a very rare childhood lymphoma, and she became a little bit of a TikTok star because she did these dances with her chemo nurses. And her mother was like, I struggled with this, but it gives her so much confidence when she is isolated having chemotherapy during the pandemic. But there are people, sort of jerks, who are going to say, you're doing this to get attention. People do say that on her TikTok to a bald 13-year-old in a chemo ward. So there's always going to be jerks, but that is sort of models the world, right? You always have to be ready to tune out the jerks and always be ready to validate yourself internally.
Yeah. I mean, I think one last thing. I'm sure Andy's got a mountain of questions too. I like what you're having to say. And it reminds me that, part of the challenges of these online spaces is, yes, there's always been jerks. But it's like the internet and the web and social media allow people to put their whole internal monologue online. Yeah. Right. So, you might have been in your middle school doing a dance in the classroom or in the cafeteria dancing or singing, and there might have been people hating on you or thinking, oh, she's just showing off or whatever. But that just never made it to you for the most part. Right. It stayed in somebody's head, or it stayed in a little clique. And so I think that it is materially different that people's internal and sometimes anonymous opinions about things show up online, and that a person has to hear it, right? That this chemo person has to even see that sort of thing. It's very, very different. And I think it's going to be interesting to see what types of therapies and new cultural and social norms that we put in place to temper that.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. And what types of things
like
parents
really
have to do to protect,
parent,
to protect their child and help them cope with that new reality. And so it sounds like you've really put a lot of thought of it in it, and that your kids are really lucky to have you and your experience at the table to help them navigate that world, because I don't think every child has a parent who is media savvy and understands the impact that can have on them. So,
and my husband is good about it too. He always says that, when I was on Fox News, there would be, 2 million people watching with 2 million different opinions, and the only one that's true is mine. And so, you cannot play to other people's opinions either on TV or on the internet or on TikTok or on a podcast. You can only really know what to think of yourself. And so, we have the advantage of having people say horrible things about us, like straight to our @ replies, and we just have to have taken it. For the most part, I have been able to laugh it off. I think it's pretty, amusing that someone would use their energy to reach out and stab somebody on the internet. But yeah, that I can't say that it all rolls off your back. It doesn't.
So Natali, I think back to the early days of the iPhone and social media really becoming a thing. And every day there you were reporting a new gadget, a new app, new technology. The pace of innovation, even though it wasn't grand innovation, it was new things, was
all the time,
was almost every day. So what was it like being in the space at that time, seeing all of these new things pop up? And at the same time, we've learned over time that from creating new things at that pace, we weren't paying attention to the damage that it could cause. It was just, let's get first to market. In that space at that time, did you see the potential danger that could happen or that was happening? Or was it just like, there's so many things that I'm just paying attention to one thing at a time?
Yes, I definitely did. And I am the kind of person who still reads books. I don't like to read a lot of long form content on the internet. I like to just read like a fully formed book about things. And I noticed that the internet was keeping our attention span, and this technology was not taking into account any of these, sort of neurological changes that could be a result of these technologies. It was just, let's move out new things. Let's try new things. And then I remember I got an email once from a viewer. I don't remember if it was an email or a tweet. We did a piece on, I think it was, at the time it was so novel that airplanes had Wi-Fi. And so we were reporting like, now American Airlines has Wi-Fi. Now this has Wi-Fi. And I went to this conference, a tech conference, and this French guy was like, why are we doing this? Why can't you just read a book? This is the last protected space is in the air. Should we be doing this?
I wrote the vast majority of my book. I wrote on an airplane. It was kind of like you looked forward to it, right?
Yeah. I remember once, though, I got on an airplane and my Kindle died like right during takeoff, and it was from San Francisco to New York. And I was no. I might die because I had no book to read.
That's when you start reading the in-flight magazine becomes very interesting.
Yeah. I survived it. I don't know how, but I used to just read a book cover to cover when I would go back and forth from New York to San Francisco. And this viewer wrote me about in-flight Wi-Fi because I totally agreed. I did not think that was necessary. And he said, how much longer will this kind of thing go in your show? And how much longer will it just be like part of our world that Starbucks has Wi-Fi and, American Airlines has Wi-Fi and these, how much longer until technology is just life? And it's not, it's not so much gadgets and connectivity and those kind of things. It's just, and I have thought so much about that comment because we were thinking that all of these things were a piece of like a nascent type of life. And now they are transparent in our lives. And it's more uncommon not to have Wi-Fi than it is to have Wi-Fi. Those things wouldn't make headlines any longer. And so I remembered thinking about like technology will just eventually exist in the background. And I think that we're there. That is the life that we got to, like it or not. And of course, I worry about two things. I worry about what it's doing to us. I worry about what it does to my kids all the time. I'm always fighting them about screen time. I hate that word. I hate my two least favorite words, screen times and snacks. Kill me. But I worry also about being worried because I know that aging makes you afraid of things that are behind you and things that are new that you may not understand. And I don't want to be that person who is just like, well, it's not the way, I don't understand that. Why do we need this? This wasn't, like it was in my day. So I try to not worry too much about things that scare me and just acknowledge like, I don't understand that. Like I don't really do TikToks, I don't feel like I understand how to present myself there. And I notice there's something inside of me that's triggered, like that's stupid. I'm not there. I don't understand it. And so I fight myself to think that things that are new are not stupid just because I don't understand them. I don't think that most of my generation will feel that way. I think as we go forward, we will feel like our parents, like, what's this? I don't want to, and I just want to embrace things and understand them in a more conscious way, and not just be afraid because I'm afraid, So there are two different things here is like, how do we, as we age, stay open-minded to what could be good and what we don't understand? But then how do we as a society also protect ourselves from what technology is doing to us? Those are two different things that I struggle with.
Yeah, I mean, that's really fascinating the way you're describing it, because it harks back to something that Andy and I talk a lot about with digital makers, the classical website makers that we're talking about, talking to and talking with a lot, which is intent.
Yeah.
And so it's funny to hear you describe your fear or sort of visceral reaction to TikTok, because a minute ago or several minutes ago, you were almost the exact opposite. You were taking up for your child and saying to your mom, they're just trying to express themselves. And so I think
she knows how, right? She and I don't. I feel
but
silly on it.
You're accepting of that those are two different things, like you using it, but you're also understanding your child's intent.
Yeah.
And so I think for everybody, when we approach or look at a new technology, that's what's going to keep us on an even keel. What's the intent of this?
Right.
Right. Is it a positive intent, or is the intention sort of malevolent? And I think a lot of technologies can wrap around both of those two themes.
Everyone is always scared of innovation in some level. Socrates was afraid of the written word because he thought that it would reduce our ability to memorize things. Right. So,
well, partially, you're talking to a philosophy major, so that's part of Socrates' problem, not all of it.
Right. But I mean, that's indicative of how we are always afraid of innovation, and maybe for valid reasons, right? But the written word did not. Well, I don't know if I want to make that statement. Would I say the written word did not destroy society? No, I have to think about that a little bit more because it was kept from people. I want to say I am glad for the written word. How about that?
It's just like you want to be on record. That'll be our headline. Shockingly, in this podcast, Natali Morris rejects the written word.
Like, I'm not sure how I feel about TikTok. I'm not sure how I feel about writing. So we're really throwing it back, right?
But that's
I
good.
don't know. Like I think about that a lot because I realize there are always valid reasons to be afraid of things, right? I'm not dismissing Socrates' concerns at all. It was valid, right? And so we need to always temper ourselves with the fact that resistance to innovation is appropriate, period.
Or expected. It's part of the human condition. I mean,
normal.
I think what normal, that's a fantastic word. I think what you're pointing to is another theme that comes up in this podcast, which is, human beings over time have lived in a stream of technological innovation. That's what we do. I mean, from fire to whatever. Go
through the Epcot ball, man.
Right. And every time we work through a technology, it shapes and forms us. And I think you're pointing to the fact that we need to be conscious about the fact that it shapes and forms us, and we need to be, at least I'm going to say this, we need to be intentional about the way that it shapes and forms us, instead of just letting it sort of blow us around in ways that we can't understand. So,
and one thing I've practiced since becoming a mother is trying to figure out when something bothers me, I'm like, what is really bothering me here? It's one thing you try to teach your kids, like you can feel like, I'm all agitated, but can you find the source of it? And then think, is that valid? Should I feel that way? Or am I just being insecure? Or, we all have to get to the root of why we're resistant to things. And it's not going to be the same for you versus for me, versus for anybody. Like like I said, some of my resistance could be that I don't want to put 42-year-old Natalie Del Conte boobs on camera the same way I was ready to do that at 28. And what if someone says something that, those kind of things are valid, but they're mine. So we all have to figure out, like, what is my resistance here?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. As we've talked, I've been thinking about, again, just the harm of technology, but as a digital creator, you talked about comments and messages and bullying, but you've persevered and you've continued to create content. So I'm just curious, like, what drives you to continue to create content on a daily basis, knowing the potential harm that could come your way, and just facing that and moving forward and continuing this desire to continue to create content in the digital space?
I am very comfortable with my written word, which is why our newsletter has become my main source of self-expression, because I write it every day and I feel that just feels really good to me. My husband, though, he really is the driver of continuing video work. I don't know if I would have the confidence to do it. In fact, I do know that I wouldn't have the confidence to do it, because even after I left full-time broadcast, I never started my own thing, even though I had a following. It was him that decided to start his own thing, because he just loves the medium of television. I started as a writer, so I'm confident continuing as a writer. And there are times when I watch my old demo reels and I think, I was pretty good on camera. Why don't I keep doing this? I just lacked the confidence without, like, a white male executive telling me I should do it. I'm not proud of that. It's just how I was conditioned. And I have had to continue to find the confidence to do things like that, because it just wasn't in me. It's just like, I used to have this broadcast coach was like, you have daddy issues. And I don't have issues with my father that are, I think, damaging to my psyche, but there is something there inside me that's like, do I have permission to speak? Raising my hand.
But weren't you speaking before the networks found you? Like, initially, weren't you? You said, you were sort of cutting edge on that. I mean, I don't. But
it wasn't me that put me on there. I was discovered, right? It would never have been my idea to do that. Before that, I was writing for newspapers. I was writing for the Oakland Tribune, the San Francisco Examiner. It was like me applying for jobs and asking for permission. It wouldn't have been in me to just start a blog. It just wouldn't have occurred to me. I wish it had, but it didn't. And so I have always been the kind of person that it's been harder to give permission to speak. In fact, have you ever heard of human design? Mm-hmm. I did a human design analysis recently, and even the person who did it is like, you don't like to just do things that no one asked you for. It's harder for some people to do that. And so that has been one of my greater challenges in the latter part of my career, where I'm not someone who just gets plucked up for being cute and, capable of speaking on camera. To give myself permission to do that is hard. My husband's really fearless, though. He can do it. And so I'm lucky that I follow his lead towards doing that. And there are plenty of times that I kick myself for just not having done it myself. When I left my broadcast platforms, like catapulting those into my own thing, but I wasn't ready. And also I was in it. I was one of those moms. I have 3 kids and I was always up to my elbows in them. So I made that choice, and I made it consciously, and I wouldn't do it any other way. I had some job offers to go back to web TV when they were really little, and I just couldn't do it. And I was lucky enough to have that choice. But motherhood erodes your confidence in yourself. No, and I think that I can say that as a blanket statement, that once you have started to shift your gaze to these little people, you've shifted it off of you and you forget what you have to offer. And that was absolutely, it's a possibility for everyone. It was absolutely a surety for me. It happened. And so I will, like I said, I will struggle to continue to create things that feel comfortable for me, because I took this long break and because I am the kind of person who always waited for permission.
Yeah, I mean, that's fascinating to hear you talk in this way. And I appreciate you being so vulnerable and honest with your experiences. It's really interesting. It's funny, I have the exact opposite response to motherhood, which is it built in me so much capacity and confidence of what I'm capable of doing, and also refined and made clear to me what my personal priorities were. And so if you're looking at it really from a pure play kind of successful business person out in the world perspective, people often say things to me like, oh, Lisa, it's too bad. You could have been so much more, right? But if I look at it from my own value system and structure, I feel like not 100%, but to a large extent, I called my shots. Yeah. Right. And I made the choice of things that were really important to me. And so I think it's important to hear your story and important to understand that there's a lot of different ways to evaluate success in life. Right. And one of them is this sort of vocational thing. And then the last thing I'll say on that, which is your story, and I'm hearing it, which is I also hear the story of somebody who loves to write. And so another side of this thing is, wow, you were writing. At some point, somebody, you have other talents and skills, as we all do. We have other talents and skills that we never actualize and fulfilled. Somebody else looked at you, saw something else, plucked you out of the writing and had you do that. And it sounds like through this journey, you've actually made it back to the thing that you really love to do, and that you chose to do in the first place, which is writing, which is also another positive way to look at you as a really powerful woman who likes to write and enjoys being a mom and takes that responsibility seriously. Yeah.
And I appreciate it when I'm allowed to do things on camera or when I do things for our show. I'm glad to do it. And then it reminds me that I'm good at something else. But like I said, I'm lazy about getting camera ready.
It's a thing.
So I'm glad to not be the regular person. Yeah, definitely. And that, I would say that's one of the main things I miss about going on the networks is that
they get you camera ready.
Like Tina Fey says in her book, Botsy Pants, you can show up looking like uncooked chicken and then they just pull miracles, right? Yeah. I loved that. But I'm also glad that I don't have it every day. It's not good for your hair. It's not good for your skin, but man, that was nice though.
Yeah.
The other thing that I'd love to just touch on a little bit back to technology is the difference between what you saw in the United States as far as technology and the response to technology and the interactions with people versus what it's like in Europe and Portugal. Like, is there a difference or is it a cultural difference? Is it a technological difference? Is it a human difference? Like, what are the differences?
Yeah. Well, when my kids started at an international school, I remembered thinking like, where's the email from the class mom before school starts? Or, where's the class email list? That does not exist in Europe. They are very strict about privacy. You cannot post about your kid's school. You cannot post like pictures of them there that have any recognizable images. You cannot write to the class list unless everyone has opted in. Privacy is a real concern there. That was not a thing in the US. We just automatically the school gave out your contact information to the class mom or the class dad, and they started writing you and you were automatically involved. They would, you had to opt out of pictures of your kids on the school website instead of opt in. And here there are no pictures of kids. It's like the back of their heads raising their hand or something. It's just, I appreciate that privacy is such a big concern here in a way that it wasn't in the US. And we've seen this in the courts. Google has faced so much privacy litigation in Europe in a way that it did not in the United States. In fact, most of the big tech companies have. Google because they're the biggest litigation, but I didn't think that would really be a thing. But then also technology, it works better in bureaucracy in Europe than it did in the US. For instance, you get a healthcare number here and then all of your health records are on this database. So then it's not my responsibility to take vaccine records around. It's just there. In the US, it's so privatized that it's it's hard. Like if you're in one system, then you have to get your records and request them and move them to another system. It's kind of crazy how that works. And it's so hard to navigate as a person. And then I noticed that my dentist is really high tech, like the most high tech dentist I've ever seen. And I was like, what are these machines? And he goes, they're actually made in America, but because of the licensing, they're not used there. And so America has a lot of like restrictive rules that prevent certain technology from getting into the marketplace around patents and things like, I mean, this, our medical system in America is, I don't even have to finish the sentence. Yeah. You know what it is. It is not like that in Europe. And because I am a resident here, I have free healthcare. I pay extra for private insurance because it's requested for visa holders. Or I don't have a visa, I have a residency card. And I'm happy to do it. You have to show that to get your first residency card. You don't have to show it for the second, but we kept it because we liked our plan, but it's really, really cheap comparatively. And it's easier and we have access to more things, and it's like, and they use technology to great effect. It's kind of shocking. It's a whole different world that I did not anticipate.
I have a whole thick conversation that I could have around that. That's one of my
medical insurance.
One of I'm hearing what you're saying about that, and I'm moving to the Netherlands from the U.S. both for personal reasons, political reasons, and one of the drivers is around healthcare. As I age and get older, being able to control those costs and to have a sensible system. But I'm also noticing, and I've mentioned before in the podcast, GDPR in the EU and just the attention that they pay to privacy and the respect, even at the most tactical level. I'm dealing with mom and pop shops
right, you
sometimes,
wouldn't think,
and they know.
Elementary school
that's exactly right.
Class list is not. It's just not something that occurred to me until I was like,
when I moved into this condominium building that I live in right now, they have a list of all the residents here. It's your name, your unit number, your phone number, and your email address, right? And so it's the directory. And so I remember going up to them, to the desk, and saying, "Look, I made an email address specifically for this condo, right?" And I was like, "This is the only information. You can say, Lisa, she lives in this unit, and this is how I want people to contact me." You would have thought I asked for I got pegged as the difficult person. Right. Who didn't want to communicate with people. And I was like, no, I just don't want all of my personal information, flying around. And so it is a cultural sensibility about privacy that's really very, very different. And it'll be interesting to see how all of this broad and wide openness that we have in the U.S. and probably in other countries as well, but this is my experience, it's just sort of untamed abandon with which we embrace these technologies. It's just, how much of it we can get back in the can and how much of it we can't. Because a lot of people have really formed their business models around this wild openness, right? And this lack of privacy. So it will be really, really interesting to watch that over time.
Yeah, it'll be interesting how, like I said, there'll be things that you didn't even think of that will be unrecognizable to you when you move abroad. And then you're like, why don't we do that? But little things that you just don't expect, like protecting children and the rights of children, and protecting someone's home address and protecting someone's email address that someone warned me when I moved abroad, Europeans love bureaucracy. They love it. Yeah. Love. As someone who's a Virgo, I'm fine with that. I have all my paperwork color coded and labeled and, I'm fine with it. But, and so these bureaucratic systems, they exist to protect people as much as they exist to help the government run smoothly. I like it. It works for me. It wouldn't work for all sensibilities.
Cool. So Natali, we want to be respectful of your time. If people wanted to find out what you've got going on, get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do so?
So our newsletter is morninginvest.com. It's a free daily newsletter. It's written, again, with the intention of empowering and informing people. And I think if you've listened to podcasts this far, you'll recognize my voice in that writing. I put a lot of myself into it. And then our morning show, which my husband hosts, is youtube.com/morninginvest. And then if you just seek me out on the normal social networks, I do have a website, but it's Natali with an I, no E. And Morris, the normal sounding way.
Awesome.
It was
Thanks
great
so much
to
for
meet
coming
you.
on.
It was great to meet you, Natali.
Yeah, you too. Yeah, thanks for inviting me on. And Andy, I'm sorry you're not in New Zealand. We were talking before the podcast about how, like, years ago we connected on Twitter. It would be more than a decade, I'm sure of it, right? And I saw your name and I read some stuff you were saying, and then I must have, like, below that tweet saw somebody else who lived in New Zealand, and I connected those bits of information in my brain. And so I have always thought when I've seen your name that you lived in New Zealand or Australia. I'm sure there's so many pieces of information that I've used about people that way that are wrong, but it just made me laugh. And you're like, no, I'm not there. So
I still think that he would love New Zealand.
You might thrive there. Maybe that's a soul clue. I don't know.
Yeah, I almost used that as the wrap. I was going to say it's getting late here in New Zealand.
Yeah.
So
Right.
Well, yeah, that's cool. And I'm definitely, when it gets super cold and dark in January and February in the Netherlands, I might be heading your direction to warm my toes, Natali. So.
Oh, I know. Yeah, that's going to be a tough one. We considered the Netherlands too. And then I was like, dark at 3.
Yeah. We'll see what happens with that. But thank you so much for your time. It was lovely to meet you.
Yeah, you too. Thank you for the invitation.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoy surfacing, please rate, review, and follow us wherever you listen to your podcasts. Also, consider supporting the podcast on Patreon at patreon.com/surfacingpodcast. If you have suggestions for guests or a topic you'd like to hear about on surfacing, please reach out via the contact form found at surfacingpodcast.com.